Many sellers believe that once they accept an offer, they should immediately start planning of moving out. That is not how it works. You just got an accepted offer, you just sold your home, and when is moving day, sellers get the wrong idea about closing, possessions, and getting paid. Hi, my name is Rima Rafeh with eXp Realty, and this is the full breakdown of what really happens after you sell your house and how moving day actually works. So before we talk about moving day, I want to talk about the confusion, because this is one of the most confusing parts of selling a home, and it can cause more stress for sellers than almost anything else in the entire process. I hear these questions constantly. Do I move out before closing? Do I move out after closing? When do I get my money? Can escrow pay me early so I can move? What if I need extra time? And what if the buyer wants possession right away? And the reason sellers are confused is simple. No one explained this clearly until you are already in the middle of it. So today we're going to slow this all the way down. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how moving day works, when you're supposed to be out, when you get paid, what escrow can and cannot do, and how to protect yourself so you don't end up stressed, rushed, or stuck. This is not a quick answer topic. This is a process topic. And once you understand the process, everything becomes easier. So let's start with the biggest misconception sellers have. Many sellers believe that once they accept an offer, they should immediately start moving out or start the process of moving out. That's not how it works. Accepting an offer does not mean you're supposed to move out. Accepting an offer means you're entering into escrow. Escrow is the period of time where the buyer and seller are working through inspections, appraisal, loan approval, and the paperwork and final conditions before ownership officially changes. During escrow, you are still the legal owner of your home. That means you still live there. You will still pay your utilities, and you will still maintain the property, and you will still have access and full control of your home. You do not move out during escrow unless there is very specific agreement in writing that says otherwise, which is extremely rare and not recommended for sellers. This is where the confusion usually starts. Sellers hear we are in escrow and think we're done, but escrow is not the end. Escrow is the bridge between agreement and ownership. So let's talk about the most important word in this entire conversation, and that is closing. Closing is the moment where ownership officially changes. This is when escrow records and when the deed transfers. Closing is when the buyer becomes the owner. And here's the key point every seller must understand. Moving day is tied to possession, not to escrow opening. And possession is the legal right to occupy the property. In most residential real estate transactions, possession transfer to the buyer at closing, not before. That means in a standard transaction, the seller moves out at closing and the buyer takes possession right after closing. But here's where sellers get tripped. Moving out before closing does not mean you move out days or weeks early. It means you are fully moved out by the time escrow closes and records. For most sellers, that means you moving day is either the day before closing or the morning of closing, depending on the timing. And of course, there is always other arrangements are made through the contract, but that's between the buyer and the seller if there's any other arrangements are made prior to executing a contract. So now let's talk about money, because this is where anxiety skyrocket. Seller often ask, how do I move if I don't have my money yet? This is a very real concern, especially if you are buying another home, relocating, or need the proceeds from the sale to fund your next step. So let's be clear on this very important step. Escrow does not release any funds until the transaction fully closes. There is no legal way for escrow to pay early just so you can move. Escrow is a neutral third party. They follow strict rules. They cannot release funds until ownership transfers. So if someone tells you escrow can't just cut you a check before closing, that is incorrect. What escrow can do is release funds immediately after recording, often the same day. In many Los Angeles, California transactions, sellers receive their funds the same day escrow closes or within 1 business day. But you do need to plan for that gap. That's why planning your move correctly is so important. So there are 2 most common moving scenarios sellers face. The first scenario is the standard move out at closing. In this situation, the seller agrees to deliver the home vacant at closing. That means all belongings are removed, the home is clean, keys are delivered, and possession transferred to the buyer when escrow closes. This is the cleanest scenario and the one buyers prefer. In this case, sellers usually move the day before closing or very early on closing day. They store their belongings temporarily, move into their next home, or stay somewhere short term until funds are received. This requires a coordination, but it avoids legal complications. The second scenario is what's called a rent back. A rent back is when the seller stays in the home after closing or a short period of time and pays rent to the buyer. This is very common, especially when sellers need time to move or are waiting for the next home to be ready. But here's where sellers need to be careful. A rent back must be agreed in writing and it must be part of the contract. This is not automatic and it's not assumed and it's not something you decide after the fact. When you do a rent back, ownership transfers to the buyer at closing and you become a tenant. That means the buyer is now your landlord. So you have to pay rent. Some scenarios you have to pay security deposit. You have to agree to a timeline and you have to agree to a daily rent if you stay past the agreed date. This can be a great solution if you need time after closing, but only if handled correctly. Now let's talk about why some sellers get confused and sometimes in trouble. Some sellers assume they can just stay a few days after closing without formal paperwork. That's extremely risky. Once escrow closes, the buyer owns the home. If you are still inside without an agreement, you are occupying someone else's property. That creates legal exposure for both sides. This is why everything about possession must be clear and documented. Now let's talk about timing and logistics because this is where real life meets paperwork. Closing do not always happen early in the morning, and some closings record late in the day, and some record unexpectedly early, and some get even delayed. This means sellers need flexibility. So you should not schedule movers down the minute without a backup plan. You should not assume funds will hit your account at a specific hour. And you should not plan same-day purchases that depends on money arriving at an exact time. Smart sellers plan some buffers. They plan temporary housing, they plan storage, they plan overlap when possible. Now let's talk about sellers who are also buying another home at the same time. This adds another layer of complexity. If you are selling and buying simultaneously, your move is often tied to 2 escrows closing together. This can work beautifully or it can be stressful if not planned properly. In these cases, coordination between both transactions is critical. Your agent should be aligning timelines, possessions, dates, and funding so you are not homeless and you're not rushing. This is also where rent backs becomes common. Now let's talk about cleaning and condition because this matters more than sellers realize. Delivering possession does not just mean empty. It means broom clean, free of debris, and the condition agreed upon. Buyers expect the home to be empty, clean, and ready for occupancy. Leaving items behind like trash or damage can create dispute at the very end when emotions are high. And let's talk about the emotion side of moving day. Moving day is super emotional for so many. It's exhausting, it's overwhelming, it's the end of a chapter. This is why sellers often make mistakes here, not because they don't care, but because they are tired. This is also why having the right agent matters. You need someone who's gonna remind you of your timelines, who confirms possession times, someone who is coordinating keys, access, and escrow, and someone who keeps you from making last-minute decisions that can cause you problems. And the biggest fears sellers have: what if something goes wrong? Most problems on moving day are preventable with planning. Confusion comes from unclear possession terms. Stress comes from poor timing, and mistakes come from assumptions. So when sellers understand the process up front, moving day becomes manageable instead of chaotic. So let's summarize this clearly. You do not move out when you accept an offer. You move out when possession transfers. Possessions usually transfers at closing. You get paid after closing, not before. And escrow cannot pay you early. Rent back must be in writing, and planning is everything. Selling a home is not just about the price. It's about timing, it's about coordination, and it's about understanding how the process actually works. If you are thinking about selling and want help planning your timeline, your move, and your possession strategy so nothing catches you off guard, I would love to help. This is Rima Rafeh with the XP Realty. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.